Friends, enemies, assorted potted plants. I was sitting here in the beige void the other day, reading an article about nurses when something piqued my interest. Piked? Piqued? Poked. I'm going to say that it poked my interest, because I think that'll piss off the most people. So, there's this article that I was reading about nurses and training and how this training and the presumption of paying for it is leading nurses to either go into extreme debt or stay on to jobs that they don't want to stay on to. What is happening is that hospitals are providing training, I use that in air quotes for reasons I'll get into, that costs $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. And they waive the fee for this training if the nurse, the prospective employee, stays with the hospital for at least 2 years. At least that's how I read it. It might be more complicated than that. It's probably more complicated than that. The nurses are describing this as, some of them literally use the words, a form of indentured servitude. This training, they say, is not adequate. It is not even really there. Because the workload, the caseload, is so high, there's very little training that even shadowing nurses can do for you, because everyone's so busy all the time. And a lot of the stuff that they're going over is stuff that they already learned in medical school. The nurses feel like these exorbitant fees are a pretext to keep them in jobs that they were not adequately prepared for. Not just not adequately prepared for in the sense that the training isn't enough, but not adequately prepared for in the sense that they were not told how understaffed these places were, how overworked that they were going to be, and how little they were actually going to be paid. And that's hard to argue with. That perspective is difficult for a person to argue with in good faith. Like, especially, it's not just the healthcare industry. It's nurses are treated especially shitty within the healthcare industry. That's just something that people know. That's not what poked my interest. What poked my interest is what the bosses, what the hospital said. They said that everything was functioning according to plan. They said that none of this was new. These programs have existed since the 80s, and they've been working fine. What is new is that people are complaining about these programs. And that's interesting. Because that means one of two things is happening, which is leading to the same thing either way. Either the bosses are lying, which, is within the realm of possibility. All bosses are bastards. Never believe a word out of their mouths. But I would find it more interesting if the bosses are telling the truth, because that tells a radically different story. If the bosses are lying, then just replace the bosses and things will, they won't be peachy keen, but they'll get better. But if the bosses aren't lying, if they're acting in good faith, and it's not enough, that tells a story of an entire system in collapse. Because either way, what is happening is very straightforward. The nurses are not receiving adequate training. Either they are not getting enough, they are being overcharged for it, or from what I've read, both of those things are happening at once. They're being overcharged for underwhelming training. And that's leading them to burn out at record rates. we aren't able to replace the nurses that we're losing through burnout and through mental exhaustion. And that's a problem. But if it's a problem of the bosses just putting money in their pocket, then you get rid of the bosses and that problem will fix itself. But if the system, if there is a system that is providing, if everyone is acting in good faith, and the system is providing perverse incentives to people who are willing to not act in good faith, that changes everything. Because if the people who are being rewarded are the people who are acting in bad faith, then the people who are going to get punished, you determine the people who are going to be punished the same way you determine which nail gets hammered down. It's who's left standing at the end of the day. What I mean by that is, if you have a hospital with 50 nurses on their payroll, and 5 of them leave, then that's the nurses' fault. They were bad nurses. We didn't want them there anyway. But if you have a hospital with 50 nurses on their payroll, and 30 of them leave, then that's a problem for management. The hospital will not be able to function. Will not be able to function at its current capacity. If you lose 2/3, if you lose 2/5 of your workforce, you're not going to be able to function at all. There is no way of picking up that slack. And I think this is important because I think this story demonstrates how important it is to understand what you're talking about, how we talk about things. I see over and over again that people talk about how workers are blamed for being stuck, being trapped in horrible circumstances, like on Facebook and on Fox News and wherever else you go, and how we need to blame the bosses for these things. But blaming the bosses for it, and I am not defending bosses, just blaming bad bosses for these things isn't adequate. Because it's not just the bosses that are the problem. It is everything that is the problem. It is capitalism that is the problem. That is the thing that needs to be replaced, needs to be overhauled. It isn't until we get to fixing capitalism or replacing capitalism. We can't fix capitalism. It isn't until capitalism is replaced with a more equitable and more humane method of societal organization that we're really going to be able to fix these things. The problem isn't people. The problem is the rules that people are being forced to follow. And I think that we need to remember that. And I think that's all I have to say about that. I'm all said out. My family did remind me earlier this week that I don't have any money to return home when I'm inevitably going to need to return home. So if you have $1 or $2 stashed away that you're not going to spend on anything, and you thought, hey, this is worthwhile, I'll spend a couple of bucks on this, feel free to contribute to the Ron Escape Fund, as I'm calling my Ko-Fi now, I guess. The likes are where they always are, the comments are where they always are. Leave one or both if you feel like it. I moderate everything carefully. I say it like that. I respond positively, or negatively, but mostly positively. Next video. What am I going to do for my next video? I felt like I didn't say enough about trans people in my last video about Michael Knowles and his genocide campaign. So I'm going to make a video explicitly saying that we need to support trans people. Yeah, I think that's what I'll do. Until we get there, go out, do something important, and take care of yourselves, alright?